In a small, quiet town surrounded by gentle hills and vast fields, there lived a woman named Elena Martinez. Her life was far from easy, but she carried herself with grace and determination. Elena had grown up in poverty, living in a tiny house that creaked with every gust of wind. The roof leaked when it rained, and the walls were thin enough to let in the cold during winter. Yet despite these hardships, Elena's heart was filled with warmth, thanks to her love for music. Elena's mother, Rosa, worked long hours at the local diner, serving meals to people who often didn't notice her kindness. Despite their struggles, Rosa always made sure to nurture Elena's passion for music. When Elena was just a child, Rosa would hum lullabies to help her fall asleep. Those soft melodies sparked something inside Elena, a deep connection to sound and rhythm. As she grew older, this connection only deepened, becoming the one constant source of joy in her unpredictable life. One day, while exploring the dusty corners of the town's community hall, Elena stumbled upon an old upright piano. It was battered and worn, its once glossy surface now covered in scratches and chips. Several keys were missing, and those that remained stuck or produced faint, off-pitch notes. To most people, it was nothing more than a piece of junk, forgotten and neglected. But to Elena, it was a treasure waiting to be discovered. With no money for lessons or access to a proper instrument, Elena decided to teach herself. She spent countless hours sitting at the broken piano, experimenting with different combinations of notes. At first, her attempts sounded clumsy and uneven, but she didn't give up. Every wrong note taught her something new, and slowly, she began to understand how the pieces fit together. Over time, her fingers learned to glide across the damaged keys, creating melodies that seemed to rise above the limitations of the instrument. The townsfolk occasionally passed by the community hall and heard snippets of Elena's playing. Some stopped to listen, marveling at how someone could create such beauty from something so flawed. Others dismissed it, assuming it was just another hobby that wouldn't amount to much. But Elena didn't play for them. She played because it made her feel alive, as if the music gave voice to all the emotions she couldn't put into words. Though her days were filled with chores and odd jobs to help her mother make ends meet, Elena always found time for the piano. Late at night, after finishing her work, she'd sit alone in the dimly lit hall, letting the music carry her away. Each session felt like a conversation between her soul and the universe, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was still light to be found. Despite her talent, Elena never imagined her music could take her beyond the boundaries of her little town. She knew the world wasn't kind to people like her, people without wealth or connections. Still, she held on to a quiet hope that someday, somehow, her gift might lead her to a better place. Little did she know, fate had other plans, and her journey was about to take a turn she could never have anticipated. The invitation arrived on a crisp autumn morning, slipped under the door of Elena's modest home. It was written on thick, creamy paper embossed with elegant gold lettering, a stark contrast to the worn wooden floorboards it landed on. Curious and slightly puzzled, Elena picked it up and read the words aloud to herself. "You are cordially invited to the Thompson family gala." Her name was printed neatly at the top, as though she were someone important. Elena couldn't remember the last time she'd been invited anywhere, let alone to an event hosted by the Thompsons. The Thompson family was practically royalty in her small town. Their sprawling mansion sat atop a hill overlooking everyone else, its manicured gardens and sparkling fountains a world away from Elena's humble surroundings. They threw lavish parties filled with laughter, fine wine, and music played by professional musicians. What could they possibly want with her? At first, Elena thought it might be some kind of mistake. She considered tossing the invitation into the fire, but something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the flicker of excitement that came with being noticed, even if just for a moment. Still unsure, she decided to ask around town to see if anyone else had received one. The answer quickly became clear. No one like her had ever been invited to a Thompson gala before. It wasn't long before Elena discovered the truth. Mrs. Harper, her chatty elderly neighbor, stopped by later that day with a basket of freshly baked bread. As they sipped tea together, Mrs. Harper casually mentioned that she'd run into Mrs. Thompson at the market recently. During their conversation, Mrs. Harper had shared how Alina often practiced on the broken piano in the community hall. She meant well, thinking it was a sweet anecdote about a local girl making the best of things. But Mrs. Thompson saw it differently. "Oh dear," Mrs. Harper said, her face falling as she realized what she'd done. "I think I may have accidentally told them about your piano playing. I didn't mean anything by it. I just thought it was charming. But now I'm afraid they're expecting." "Well," she trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Alina frowned, piecing it all together. The Thompsons weren't inviting her because they admired her talent or wanted to support her dreams. No, this wasn't about respect. It was about amusement. To them, she was nothing more than a novelty act, a poor woman playing a broken piano for their entertainment. The realization stung, but it didn't surprise her. She'd grown up knowing how people like the Thompsons viewed those below them. To them, she was invisible unless she could provide some form of distraction. For days, Alina wrestled with whether or not to attend. On one hand, she felt humiliated even considering going to a party where she'd likely be laughed at. On the other hand, a stubborn part of her refused to let fear dictate her choices. Deep down, she knew she had nothing to prove to the Thompsons or anyone else. But another voice whispered louder, "What if you go, not to entertain them, but to remind yourself that you're more than what they think you are?" As the date of the gala approached, Alina found herself standing in front of her cracked mirror, staring at her reflection. She wore her only decent dress, a simple navy blue number that had belonged to her mother years ago. It wasn't fancy, but it fit her well enough. With a deep breath, she pinned her dark hair back and smoothed out the wrinkles in her skirt. Whether out of defiance or determination, she made up her mind. She would go to the gala, not to play their game, but to show them who she truly was. Little did she know her decision would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone who underestimated the power of resilience in art. Alina's heart pounded as she approached the Thompson mansion on the night of the gala. The grand estate loomed ahead, its windows glowing like golden lanterns against the dark sky. Cars lined the driveway, their polished surfaces gleaming under the soft light of the entrance. Men in tuxedos and women in shimmering gowns stepped out, laughing and chatting as they made their way inside. Alina felt out of place even before she reached the door, her plain dress and worn shoes a stark contrast to the elegance around her. She hesitated for a moment, gripping the edges of her cardigan tightly. Doubt crept into her mind, whispering cruel reminders of why she shouldn't be there. "This is their world," it said, "not yours." But then she remembered her mother's words from years ago. "Never let anyone dim your light." Those words had carried her through countless difficult days. And now, standing at the foot of the mansion's grand staircase, they gave her strength. Taking a deep breath, she straightened her shoulders and walked forward. Inside, the ballroom was a scene of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting glittering reflections across the marble floor. A string quartet played softly in the corner, their music blending with the murmur of conversation. Waiters weaved through the crowd, carrying trays of champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Everything about the room screamed wealth and privilege, things Alina had never known but could recognize all too well. As she entered, heads turned, not because they were impressed, but because they were curious. Whispers rippled through the crowd as people noticed her simple attire and quiet demeanor. Some openly stared, while others nudged their companions and smirked. Alina tried to ignore them, focusing instead on the task ahead. She reminded herself why she had come, to prove something to herself, not to win approval from people who didn't understand her. A waiter offered her a glass of sparkling water, which she accepted gratefully. As she sipped, trying to steady her nerves, Mr. Thompson appeared at the center of the room. He was a tall man with sharp features and an air of authority that commanded attention. Flapping his hands lightly to silence the guests, he began speaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice smooth and confident. "Tonight we have a special surprise for you. You may have heard rumors about a young woman in our town who plays the piano, quite uniquely." The room erupted into murmurs, some amused, others intrigued. Alina felt her stomach tighten. She knew what was coming next, and she braced herself for the humiliation. Sure enough, Mr. Thompson gestured toward the far side of the room, where a familiar object had been placed. An old, battered upright piano. It was the same one she practiced on in the community hall, complete with its missing keys and sticking hammers. Someone must have dragged it here just for this occasion. "And so," Mr. Thompson continued, turning his gaze toward Alina, "let us welcome Miss Alina Martinez, who has kindly agreed to entertain us tonight." His tone was polite, but the glint in his eye betrayed his true intentions. This wasn't an invitation. It was a challenge, designed to amuse the wealthy elite at her expense. For a brief moment, Alina considered turning around and leaving. The weight of their stares pressed down on her, threatening to crush her resolve. But then she thought of the countless hours she spent practicing on that very piano, coaxing melodies from its broken frame. She thought of her mother humming lullabies to comfort her when times were tough. And most importantly, she thought of the fire within her, the part of her that refused to back down. With slow, deliberate steps, Alina crossed the room and took her seat at the piano. The chatter died down as everyone waited to see what she would do next. Some leaned closer, eager to witness the spectacle, while others exchanged smug smiles. Alina ignored them all, closing her eyes for a moment to steady her breathing. When she opened them again, her fingers hovered above the keys, ready to transform mockery into magic. What happened next would leave no one in doubt, not just about her talent, but about the strength of a spirit unbroken by judgment or ridicule. The room fell silent as Alina placed her hands on the keys of the broken piano. The smirks and whispers that had filled the air just moments ago now gave way to an expectant hush. Everyone leaned in, their curiosity piqued. Some guests exchanged skeptical glances, convinced they were about to witness a disaster. Others crossed their arms, ready to laugh at what they assumed would be an awkward failure. But Alina didn't notice any of this. Her focus was absolute, her mind tuned only to the instrument before her. She began to play. At first, the notes were hesitant, uneven, the result of missing keys and strings that refused to stay in tune. A few people shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they should clap politely or wait for something better. But then, something remarkable happened. Alina's fingers adapted, weaving through the flaws of the piano with astonishing skill. Where notes were absent, she improvised. Where chords faltered, she found harmony. It was as though she wasn't limited by the brokenness of the instrument, but inspired by it, turning its imperfections into something breathtakingly unique. The melody grew stronger, richer, filling the vast ballroom with a sound that seemed almost otherworldly. It wasn't perfect, not in the traditional sense, but it carried an emotion so raw and powerful that it silenced even the most cynical critics. The music swelled, telling a story without words, of struggle, resilience, and hope. Each note resonated deeply, tugging at hearts and stirring memories long buried. Alina closed her eyes, losing herself in the music. She no longer saw the crowd of wealthy strangers watching her every move. Instead, she envisioned the quiet hours spent alone in the community hall, pouring her soul into practice. She thought of her mother, humming softly while scrubbing dishes late at night. She remembered the nights when life felt unbearable, yet the piano offered solace. All of those moments flowed through her fingertips, transforming the broken piano into a vessel of pure expression. As the piece progressed, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The initial amusement faded, replaced by awe. Guests who had come expecting a joke found themselves holding their breath, unwilling to miss a single note. One woman dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, moved to tears by the depth of emotion in Alina's playing. A man standing near the back of the room whispered to his companion, This is incredible." Even Mr. Thompson, who had orchestrated the entire setup as a lighthearted prank, looked stunned, his jaw slightly agape. What struck everyone most was how effortlessly Elena commanded the damaged instrument. It was clear that her talent wasn't merely technical, it came from within, born out of years of dedication and passion. She didn't need a pristine grand piano to create beauty. She could make music anywhere, with anything. This realization hit the audience like a wave, forcing them to confront their own biases. They had dismissed her based on appearances, assuming her poverty equaled mediocrity. Yet here she was, proving them wrong in the most profound way possible. When the final note rang out, lingering in the air like a whisper, the room remained utterly still. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. A hesitant, solitary sound at first. Another joined in, then another, until the entire room erupted into applause. It wasn't polite clapping, reserved for obligatory performances. This was thunderous, heartfelt admiration, the kind that echoed off walls and brought goosebumps to the skin. People rose to their feet, cheering and calling out praises. Elena opened her eyes, startled by the reaction. She hadn't played for them, for their approval or entertainment. She had played for herself, to honor the journey that had brought her here. And yet, seeing their faces, once judgmental, now full of respect, filled her with a quiet sense of triumph. She stood up slowly, bowing her head slightly in acknowledgement of the applause. But deep down she knew this was only the beginning. The same spirit that had carried her through years of hardship would continue to guide her forward. What started as mockery had turned into a moment of undeniable brilliance, one that would change not only her life, but also the way others viewed the power of perseverance in art. As the applause filled the room, Elena felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Surprise, relief, and a quiet pride she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She stood there, still clutching the edge of the piano bench, unsure of what to do next. The crowd was on its feet now, clapping and cheering as though they couldn't get enough. Some people whistled, while others shouted words of admiration. Bravo! Amazing! Unbelievable! It was overwhelming, not just because of the noise, but because of the shift she saw in their faces. Moments earlier, those same faces had been smirking, ready to laugh at her expense. Now, they looked at her with wide eyes, mouths slightly open in disbelief. Even Mr. Thompson, who had orchestrated the whole thing as a joke, seemed genuinely stunned. He stepped forward, trying to regain his composure, and raised a hand to quiet the room. When the applause finally died down, he cleared his throat and said, "Well, that was certainly unexpected." His voice carried a note of awkwardness, as if he wasn't quite sure how to handle what had just happened. "Miss Martinez," he continued, "you have truly amazed us all." Elena nodded politely, keeping her expression calm despite the storm of feelings inside her. She didn't trust herself to speak yet. Instead, she scanned the room, taking in the sea of faces turned toward her. Among them, she noticed a man standing near the back, a tall figure with sharp features and an intense gaze. Unlike the others, he wasn't clapping or smiling. Instead, he watched her intently, his brow furrowed as though deep in thought. Something about him caught her attention, though she couldn't place why. Before she could dwell on it, another guest approached her, a woman in an elegant red gown. "That was extraordinary," the woman gushed, her hands clasped together. "I've never heard anything like it. How do you manage to play so beautifully on such a—" Well, she glanced at the broken piano and trailed off, clearly searching for the right word. "On such a challenging instrument," she finished diplomatically. Elena smiled faintly. "It's not about the instrument," she replied softly. "It's about what you bring to it." Her words drew murmurs of agreement from nearby listeners, and soon more people began approaching her. They introduced themselves, praising her talent and asking questions about her background. Some offered vague promises of support. "We should talk more about this," or "let me know if there's anything I can do." Elena listened politely, nodding and thanking them. Though she remained cautious, she'd learned long ago not to trust empty words. Amidst the chatter, the man from the back finally made his way to her. He introduced himself as Jonathan Reed, a music producer visiting from the city. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his tone serious but kind, "but I need to tell you something. That performance, it was unlike anything I've ever seen. You took something broken and turned it into art. That's rare, Miss Martinez, very rare." Alina blinked, taken aback by his sincerity. "Thank you," she said simply, unsure of how else to respond. Jonathan went on, "I work with artists, helping them share their gifts with the world. And I believe your gift deserves to be heard far beyond this room. Would you consider letting me help you record an album? Your story, your music, it has the power to inspire people." The offer caught her off guard. For a moment, she thought it might be another form of mockery, disguised as kindness. But looking into Jonathan's eyes, she saw no trace of condescension, only genuine respect. Still, she hesitated. This was a world she knew nothing about, one that felt impossibly distant from her own. Could she really step into it? Did she even want to? Before she could answer, Mrs. Thompson appeared, offering a tray of champagne flutes. "Here, dear," she said brightly, handing one to Alina. "You must celebrate this wonderful moment." Alina accepted the glass, though she didn't drink from it. Instead, she held it tightly, using it as an anchor to steady herself amidst the whirlwind of attention. As the night wore on, Alina found herself reflecting on how quickly things had changed. Just hours ago, she had walked into the mansion feeling invisible, certain she would leave the same way. Now she was surrounded by people eager to praise her, to learn her name, to offer opportunities she had never dreamed of. Yet through it all, one thing remained clear: none of this changed who she was. She was still Alina Martinez, the girl who played a broken piano in a forgotten corner of town. And no matter where life took her next, she vowed to stay true to that, to the music, to her roots, and to the resilience that had brought her here. The days following the gala felt like a dream for Alina, though she struggled to fully believe it was real. News of her performance spread quickly through the town, carried by the very same people who had once overlooked her. At first, whispers filled the streets. How could someone like Alina, from such humble beginnings, have stunned the wealthy elite? But soon, curiosity turned into admiration, and admiration grew into pride. Neighbors who barely acknowledged her before now stopped her on the street to congratulate her. "We always knew you were special," one woman said with a warm smile, though Alina couldn't help but notice the irony. Back at home, Alina found herself sitting in silence, replaying the events of that night in her mind. The applause, the compliments, Jonathan Reed's unexpected offer. It all seemed too good to be true. Her mother, Rosa, watched her closely, sensing her daughter's hesitation. One evening, as they sat together at their small kitchen table, Rosa reached across and took Alina's hand. "What's worrying you?" she asked gently. Alina sighed, staring down at the chipped surface of the table. "It's just, everything changed so fast. One moment, I'm invisible, and the next, everyone wants a piece of me. What if they're only interested because of the story? The poor girl playing the broken piano. It sounds like something out of a fairy tale." Rosa squeezed her hand firmly. "Maybe it does," she admitted, "but that doesn't make what you did any less real. You showed them your heart, Mecha. That's not something anyone can fake." Her words stayed with Alina, grounding her when doubt threatened to take over. She decided to meet with Jonathan again, curious to hear more about his proposal. Over coffee at a quiet cafe in town, he explained his vision: an album that would capture her unique voice and journey, blending classical influences with raw, emotional storytelling. He wanted to highlight not just her talent, but also the resilience that defined her music. "Your story is part of your art," he told her. "People don't just want to hear your songs, they want to feel them." Alina listened carefully, weighing his words. She had spent so much of her life hiding her gift, afraid of judgment or rejection. Now, here was someone offering her a chance to share it with the world. Still, she worried about losing herself in the process. "I don't want to become someone I'm not," she confessed. "If I do this, I want it to be honest. No gimmicks, no pretending." Jonathan nodded, his expression serious. "That's exactly why I believe in you," he said. "You don't need gimmicks. Your authenticity is your strength." With her mother's encouragement and Jonathan's reassurance, Alina agreed to move forward. Recording sessions began in a modest studio outside the city, where Alina worked tirelessly to translate her experiences into music. Each song told a chapter of her life. The struggles, the joys, the quiet moments of hope. When she played, the engineers and producers listened in awe, often forgetting their roles as they became absorbed in her melodies. Meanwhile, back in the town, excitement continued to build. The community hall, once neglected and forgotten, became a hub of activity as locals gathered to celebrate Alina's success. Inspired by her story, donations poured in to restore the space, including the old piano that had started it all. By the time Alina returned home to visit, the hall gleamed with fresh paint and new furnishings. Even the piano had been repaired, its keys polished, and tuned to perfection. Standing in front of the restored instrument, Alina felt a lump rise in her throat. She ran her fingers lightly over the keys, remembering the countless hours she'd spent there, pouring her soul into every note. Her mother stood beside her, tears glistening in her eyes. "Look how far you've come," Rosa whispered. "And this is just the beginning." Alina smiled, knowing her mother was right. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but she faced it with a newfound confidence. She had proven to herself, and to the world, that even in the face of mockery and hardship, true talent and determination could shine through. And as she prepared to release her debut album, titled Broken Keys, she vowed to use her platform to uplift others, ensuring that no one else would ever feel invisible again. Months passed, and Alina's life transformed in ways she could never have imagined. Her debut album, Broken Keys, was released to widespread acclaim. Critics praised its raw emotion and authenticity, calling it a masterpiece of resilience and a testament to the power of the human spirit. The title track, inspired by her journey with the broken piano, became an instant hit, resonating with listeners around the world. People connected deeply with the story behind the music, how a young woman from a small, struggling town had turned adversity into art. Radio stations played her songs on repeat, and soon, Alina found herself invited to interviews and talk shows. At first, she felt out of place under the bright studio lights, surrounded by polished hosts and sleek cameras. But as she spoke about her experiences, the challenges she faced, the nights spent practicing alone, and the night that changed everything, she realized her story mattered. It wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to anyone who had ever felt underestimated or overlooked. One evening, after a particularly moving interview, a young girl approached her backstage. Clutching a worn notebook filled with scribbled lyrics, the girl shyly handed it to Alina. "I want to write songs too," she said, her voice trembling. "But I didn't think anyone would care. Hearing your story made me believe I can try." Alina knelt down to meet the girl's eyes. "You absolutely can," she said firmly, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Don't let anyone tell you your dreams are too big or too small. Just keep creating, no matter what." Moments like these reminded Alina why she had agreed to share her music with the world. Fame brought luxuries she had never known, a comfortable apartment, financial stability, even recognition wherever she went. But the greatest reward was knowing she could inspire others. She began visiting schools and community centers, speaking to children and teenagers about the importance of perseverance and self-belief. Often, she brought along her old repaired piano, using it to demonstrate how imperfections could become strengths. Back in her hometown, Alina's success sparked a wave of change. The restored community hall became a vibrant center for local artists, offering free workshops and performances. Inspired by Alina's journey, other aspiring musicians, painters, and writers stepped forward, eager to pursue their passions. Even Mrs. Thompson, once amused by the idea of Alina playing at her gala, donated generously to support the arts program. "We all underestimated you," she admitted during one visit. "But now look what you've done for this town." Despite her growing fame, Alina remained grounded, returning frequently to the place where her journey began. On quiet evenings, she would sit at the repaired piano in the community hall, letting her fingers drift over the keys. Sometimes her mother joined her, humming softly as they shared a moment of reflection. "You've come so far," Rosa would say, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your father would be so proud." Alina often thought about the night of the gala, the mocking smiles, the condescending remarks. The broken piano meant to embarrass her. Instead of bitterness, however, she felt gratitude. That night had been a turning point, not because of the audience's reaction, but because it forced her to confront her own doubts. She had walked onto that stage expecting ridicule, but left with a renewed sense of purpose. Her album continued to climb charts, earning awards and accolades. Yet Alina refused to let success define her. To her, the real victory lay in staying true to herself, honoring the girl who had once played a broken piano in an empty hall, dreaming of something more. And as she prepared for her first international tour, she carried with her the lessons of her past. That talent cannot be silenced, resilience cannot be broken, and even the most unlikely beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings. Alina's journey had come full circle, but it was far from over. Her international tour took her to cities she'd only seen in books and movies, places where skyscrapers pierced the clouds and streets buzzed with endless energy. In each city, she performed to sold-out crowds, her music weaving a connection between strangers who might otherwise never have found common ground. The stage lights dazzled, the applause roared, and yet Alina remained the same humble woman who had once played a broken piano in a forgotten corner of her town. One night, after a particularly emotional performance in Paris, a young man approached her backstage. His hands trembled as he handed her a crumpled piece of paper. "I wrote this after hearing your album," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It saved me when I didn't think I could go on." Alina unfolded the paper to find a poem scrawled in hurried handwriting. It spoke of struggle, hope, and finding light in the darkest moments. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at him. "Thank you for sharing this with me," she said softly. "And thank you for reminding me why I do what I do." Moments like these were the true highlights of her career, not the awards or magazine covers, but the lives she touched along the way. She began dedicating portions of her concerts to telling stories of resilience, encouraging her audience to believe in their own strength. Often, she ended her shows by inviting local musicians to join her on stage, giving them a chance to shine. For Alina, success wasn't about standing above others. It was about lifting them up. Back home, the community hall thrived as a sanctuary for creativity. Artists of all ages gathered there daily, inspired by Alina's example. Murals painted by local children adorned the walls, vibrant colors telling stories of dreams and determination. A plaque hung near the entrance, inscribed with words Alina had spoken during one of her visits. "Art is not about perfection. It's about courage. Create boldly, live fearlessly." Despite her global fame, Alina never forgot her roots. She returned often, bringing gifts for the townsfolk and organizing events to celebrate their collective progress. Once, during a summer festival, she surprised everyone by playing the old upright piano that had started it all. As her fingers danced across the keys, the crowd fell silent, transported back to the night that changed everything. When the final note faded, cheers erupted, echoing through the hills. Her mother, now older but still full of warmth, watched proudly from the sidelines. "You've done more than make us proud," Rosa told her later. "You've shown people that no matter where you start, you can reach the stars if you keep believing." As time went on, Alina continued to evolve as an artist. Her second album, titled Rising Tides, explored themes of growth and gratitude, reflecting how far she, and those around her, had come. Critics hailed it as another triumph, but Alina cared less about reviews and more about the messages she received from fans. Letters poured in from every corner of the globe, each one a testament to the impact of her music. Some thanked her for helping them heal. Others shared how her story gave them the courage to chase their dreams. In interviews, Alina often spoke about the importance of staying grounded. "Fame doesn't change who you are," she would say. "It just amplifies it. If you're kind, kindness grows. If you're authentic, authenticity shines. And if you're resilient, resilience inspires." Years later, when asked to reflect on her journey, Alina smiled thoughtfully. "I used to think my life was defined by what I lacked: a perfect instrument, formal training, opportunities. But now, I see that my greatest strengths came from those very things. My broken piano taught me to adapt. My struggles taught me to persevere. And my invisibility taught me to create my own spotlight." Alina Martinez's name became synonymous with hope and inspiration. Yet to those who knew her best, she remained the same quiet, determined woman who had once sat alone in a dusty community hall, coaxing melodies from a battered piano. Her story proved that even in a world quick to judge, talent and perseverance could break barriers, and that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places.